Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in again. I'm eager to share with you some more thoughts um, regarding some issues that have been at the center of many discussions that I've had recently with clients and with others and parents that I work with regularly in the parent leadership group. Now, of course, these topics that we're discussing have to do with so many phenomena in life. But as a family counselor right now, I tie everything into family and everything into, I guess you could say, parental leadership, because I feel that as parents, we need to be able to explain what's going on in the world to our kids. Um, so, anyway, I continually share these insights, and again, they apply to a lot of different things other than parenting, and especially what I'm going to talk about right now, real quickly, if that's even possible. It's a big topic. Um, but like all the things that I talk about, I always want to tie it into what is occurring for us right now in what many of us are seeing is this magnified feeling of entitlement that seems to have permeated all of society. Uh, and so the bulk of my work since 1993 has been exploring this phenomena and developing ways for all of us to more clearly see what's going on, um, and to be able to understand that and to be able to become a force to reckon with in terms of turning the tide, if you will, of pushing back the tide of entitlement. Now, I can tell you that ultimately entitlement does play an important role in human development. But there's two kinds. There's false entitlement and there's true entitlement. Um, that being said, I want to introduce you to something to think about. Um, and I'll do this by telling a couple of stories. Recently, I met with a family, sat in their living room, happened to be a single parent. And this parent, I was there because the family had been experiencing a tremendous amount of stress and conflict for quite some time. And so as I was there in the living room talking to this parent, of course, the teens um, in the family were kind of coming in and out of the room, and they seemed to be a bit agitated. And I asked what was going on, and the parent explained that there were some issues going on with another parent, etc., that were hurtful, causing stress and distress. Um, but I had been working with this family for maybe a month and a half, and they were constantly under distress, constantly facing what they perceived to be problems and challenges that they could not overcome. And I had an insight. And the insight was is almost like a round ball or a marble being placed on a surface. Um, and if you place something perfectly round on a surface and there's any biases in that surfaces, if there's any leanings or tendencies in it, the ball will roll that way. So every time you put a ball on that surface, it'll roll that particular way. And I thought to myself, isn't it interesting that every time this family experiences an issue, some sort of intrusion from the outside world, which automatically gets interpreted as a problem, as a source of stress and conflict, uh, isn't it interesting that they tend to respond to it in the same way over and over again? So every time a problem, every time an issue, an intrusion, whatever you want to call it, a circumstance arose with this family, they tended to deal with it in a particular way. Now, adding to that, we've had a recent discussion around a parable, or a quote actually, that I used um, in the group from Eleanor Roosevelt, and it goes like this: small minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, and great minds talk about ideas. And so as I reflected more, I began to see that every time this family encountered some kind of challenge, if you will, some sort of circumstance, um, that they were talking about people. Probably 80, 90% of the time they were talking about people, complaining about people, what people had done to them or not done to them, but it was always about people. Sometimes it was about the event. But what they never talked about, what was never spoken of, was the ideas. Now, what I call this, the phrase that I use, I guess that I've coined to help parents understand this more, is the need to elevate a conversation. That when people start to get stuck, they often get stuck in talking about people and the events. And what a good leader can do, what a mature person can do, is that they can raise up the conversation into something more significant, something that allows the person to have greater understanding and greater insight. Now, we all know, and this is another mark of being mature, is that it's easier to look outside ourselves and see the problems that other people have, how other people have hurt us. But as a sports coach, I often refer to that as second best, second place. That's not first place. First place is being able to look at these circumstances through an elevated position and begin to learn lessons. In other words, what does this circumstance say about me? What does it reveal? And we can't really get that kind of perspective unless we begin to have an elevated vision, an elevated conversation. So what I was witnessing in that family, that every time an intrusion showed up, was that they could not access an elevated vision, an elevated perspective on what was going on. Now, we might be able to forgive the teenagers in the house for that, because it's the people that they look up to, the adults, that really should be carrying that vision and sharing that vision with their teens, which is really part of what we call raising people up. This is how we as mature adults raise children. Giving them food and shelter, is part of it. But really raising people up is about offering an inspiring vision, elevating the conversation. And I could see in this moment that this mom could not do that. That where she was stuck was in talking about people and maybe events. Which, if you could say diagnostically, that's an indication that her mind had not really matured. So as I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about this kind of marble on a surface analogy, I began to think also about myself as a gardener. And what I've really come to appreciate over the last several years is soil quality. I started my garden in a patch of earth that had been depleted. And when I would plant my seeds, the plants would not grow or would not do well. And when they faced challenging circumstances in the world, drought, heat, wind, that they just didn't seem resilient and they just couldn't respond well. And so I spent several years rebuilding the soil, year after year, pouring into it some nutrients and nurturing it and caring for it. And the last year, it produced tremendously. And the plants were extremely hardy. And I began to think about that, and I began to think about how human beings too, we have a psychological soil. I wrote an article recently that I posted on my LinkedIn page, so you can go there and have a look at it if you'd like, or contact me and I'll send it to you. But when I'm thinking about psychological soil, what is it that we need as human beings? What is it that this family needed in order to face the challenges of life with resilience and resolve and perseverance and vitality? Well, I could see that where they were kind of stuck in these what we call narratives and what I'll call false narratives, but certain narratives, certain ways of seeing the world, certain ways they interpreted things. So things happened, and then those things were, absorbed or assimilated into pre-existing stories or narratives. Now, a lot of these narratives that they were dealing with had really significantly been influenced by trauma history. And we know oftentimes when trauma has occurred with people or in families, it does give rise to tragic narratives, to dark narratives, to unhealthy narratives. And that word narrative is being used a lot these days, and I think it's being used to broad brush a number of different things. And so I want to separate a couple of things here. There's, excuse me, what's known as a prescribed narrative. So what I mean by that, prescription, it's like when we come to this planet, this is what we call systems theory, and other things, is that when we come to this planet and we join a family or a tribe, we get prescribed a role. It's kind of man-made. Now, sometimes I end up making my own role. So as human beings, we can make up our own roles as well. That being said, what they have in common is they're both man-made. Somewhere deeper in the psyche, there's what's called an inscription, something written in stone, something that never changes. We know, of course, as therapists and counselors, that we're often working with the untrue narratives. The untrue narratives seem to bury the true narrative. So we're disintegrating that so the truth, if you will, of a person can shine through, can be restored. But just to say that there are these two, if you will, places, and I hesitate to call them stories or narratives, because the inscription, which is contained more in the unconscious mind, is actually more akin to mythology. It's a mythic storyline, a huge, grand, powerful storyline. Mythologists, of course, and Jungians know this to be true in the world of archetypes. That's what that part of our mind is akin to, made up of, resonates with, that there are these deep, true, inspiring stories, if you will, that these inscriptions that are embedded in the psyche. And the untrue narratives, the prescriptions, are the ones that can be changed. They need to be changed in order for us to make contact, to reintegrate with our inscription. So that's mythology, where others are just simple stories. Now I'm asking myself, where, as human beings, do we get this rich soil from? This rich, or this rich story, this rich inscription from? How do we come to know it? How do we become to be grounded in that rather than grounded in something more shallow and untrue? Well, if we look back historically, most of us were raised on mythology, on fairy tales, on, dare I say, religion. Now, I want to revisit that word too, because part of integrity is knowing about, the definition of words and the, history of words and what they truly mean. Because certainly over the last probably 50 to 60 years, I think there's been a fairly proactive dismantling of what might be considered religion. But I think oftentimes as human beings, we run the risk and oftentimes throw out the baby with the bathwater because we don't really understand what particular words mean. So, in just a little bit of research that I did on the word religion, RE on the front of a word, by the way, always means again. So if you look at the words, rewind, recall, remind, any time you see RE on the front of the word, it means again. Now, religion, if you will, re and religion, there seems to be some variations in interpretation of it, but one that I felt really made sense for our discussion was one attributed, one understanding, one definition was given by Joseph Campbell, and there was another mythologist as well that was referred to. But Joseph Campbell, of course, is very well known and was very instrumental in the whole Star Wars movie series, etc. But religion, coming from ligare, actually means to bind. So the word religion means to rebind. So what religion is in the mythology within it is used to almost bridge human beings with that which is sacred. And this happens in all cultures. There's rites, rituals, symbols, etc. That are considered pathways to remembering, rebinding, rebonding with what is sacred. And what I saw in this family is that they somehow were very disconnected from that inscription, very disconnected from that sacred mythology. So the question is how does this family put nutrition in its psychological soil? How do I do it as a facilitator, as a counselor, as a therapist? I can tell you though, again, the inscriptions are in stone. They're there, a little buried, but my job as a therapist and counselor is to come in and hold that vision, to help the person remember the inscription, to challenge the false narratives, and to almost create a pathway by which this person and this family can have a reunion with what is already there. So I hope this has been helpful for you to understand a bit of this. And that you can have these conversations with the people around you and give it some thought yourself. I'll say more in my next series, which is going to really focus on the whole entitlement and indulgence phenomena, and I'll introduce to you the indulgence triangle. So feel free to fire me off an email or visit my page on LinkedIn, and I will be posting many of these reflections there. So have a great day. Bye.